Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that the money in your wallet isn't valuable because of gold or because of the economy or even because of trust. Imagine discovering it's valuable because the entire world has been forced to play a game designed decades ago. A game where every country needs your currency, every nation feeds your financial system, and every crisis somehow makes you stronger. Sounds impossible, right? Because countries become rich by producing things. They build factories, they sell products, they export resources. But what if one country discovered something different? What if it found a way to become rich simply because everyone else needed its money? For over 50 years, this system quietly shaped wars, economies, politics, and global power. And most people have never even heard of it. This is the story of the petrodollar. And once you see how the machine works, you can't unsee it. The story begins with a problem. Actually, a huge problem. Let's go back to the early 1970s. At the time, America looked unstoppable. The US economy was massive. The dollar ruled international trade, and the world trusted America more than anyone else. But hidden underneath that power was a crack growing larger every year. After World War II, global finance worked under something called the Bretton Woods system. The rules were simple. The US dollar was tied to gold, and every major currency was tied to the dollar. This meant countries everywhere could hold dollars with confidence, because technically, dollars weren't just paper. They represented gold sitting in American vaults. Think of it like a casino. People only trust casino chips because they believe they can exchange them back for real money. Now imagine the casino secretly printing millions of extra chips. Soon, people would start asking questions, and that's exactly what happened. America was spending enormous amounts of money. The Vietnam War, Cold War competition, government programs, huge projects, and more spending meant more dollars being created. There was only one problem. Gold wasn't increasing at the same speed. Countries began noticing something strange. America seemed to have more dollar claims floating around the world than actual gold available. So foreign governments started doing something simple. They asked for their gold. France was among the loudest. Other nations followed. Suddenly, people were lining up at America's financial door, saying, "We'd like our gold back." America faced a terrifying possibility. If too many countries demanded gold at once, the system could collapse. Then came August 15th, 1971. President Richard Nixon appeared on television, and with a single announcement, everything changed. America stopped converting dollars into gold. Just like that, the link was gone. The world entered completely new territory. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. Now people had a giant question. What exactly gives this paper value? Because money only works when people believe it works, and trust can disappear very quickly. For a moment, America looked vulnerable, but then the world threw something unexpected into the equation: oil. In 1973, a war erupted in the Middle East. Tensions exploded, and major oil producers used the most powerful economic weapon they had: supply. Production dropped. Prices surged. The impact spread everywhere. Gas prices climbed. Inflation rose. People waited in lines just to fill their cars. The economy felt pain. Suddenly, the world realized something important. Oil wasn't just another product. It was survival. Factories needed it. Cars needed it. Airplanes needed it. Countries needed it. Modern life ran on oil. And then, someone inside Washington saw an opportunity. If gold could no longer support the dollar, maybe something else could. Not gold, something bigger, something every country desperately needed: oil. Imagine sitting in a strategy room and hearing this question: if the entire world needs oil, what if the entire world needed dollars to buy oil? Now things become interesting, because if every nation needs dollars first, then demand for dollars never disappears. Japan needs energy? Get dollars. Germany needs energy? Get dollars. India needs energy? Get dollars. The system starts feeding itself. The currency isn't supported by a metal underground. It's supported by global necessity, and that changed everything. Deals were made, relationships deepened, economic and security interests aligned. Over time, oil transactions around the world increasingly flowed through dollars. And once dollars moved into the system, something else happened. The dollars didn't simply vanish, they came back.
Oil-producing nations accumulated huge amounts of money. Then they had a question: where do we put all these dollars? Many flowed into American financial assets, treasury bonds, banks, markets, investments. Money traveled outward and then circled back like water moving through pipes. The machine had started, and it became incredibly powerful because America didn't need to produce every barrel of oil. It simply sat at the center of the financial roads everyone else traveled through. And when you're at the center of the roads, traffic naturally comes to you. Part 2. How the dollar became a weapon. But money wasn't the real prize. Power was. Because once you're sitting at the center of the world's financial system, something strange happens. You stop controlling only money, you start controlling movement. Imagine the internet. Billions of people use it every day. Now imagine one country owned most of the servers, cables, and payment systems keeping it alive. You wouldn't just control websites, you could control access itself. That's essentially what happened with the global financial system. Over time, the dollar became much more than currency. It became infrastructure. Banks connected to trade moved through it. Governments stored reserves in it. Companies borrowed.
Countries measured wealth in it. The world slowly built highway. America owned many of the exits. And that created a superpower nobody had fully seen before: sanctions. Now, sanctions sound boring. The word feels like something from a politics textbook, but sanctions can hit harder than bombs. Because imagine waking up and finding out your bank account doesn't work. Your country's companies can't get paid. Imports stop arriving. Foreign businesses disappear. Money freezes. Trade slows. Investors panic. Your economy suddenly feels like somebody pulled the plug out of the wall. That's what happens when nations get cut off from major parts of the financial system. For decades, countries feared them. Because being disconnected wasn't just losing money, it was losing access to the machine, and the machine was huge. By the early 2000s, the dollar touched nearly every corner of the global economy. Governments held dollar reserves. Oil traded mostly in dollars. International loans used dollars. Massive financial institutions operated through dollars. The world wasn't simply using American currency anymore. The world depended on it. But then something started changing. Questions appeared, small at first, then louder, because history has a pattern. Whenever one system dominates for too long, someone eventually asks, what happens if we build another one? Some country. What happens if we trade without dollars? Others asked, what if we settle payments using our own currencies? Some increased gold purchases. Some created alternative payment systems. Some made direct trade agreements. At first, these looked like tiny cracks. Nothing serious, but tiny cracks have a habit of growing. Then came 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine, and the response from the West was massive. Sanctions arrived quickly. Russian banks faced restrictions, and around $300 billion of Russian foreign reserves became inaccessible. Countries around the world noticed this move. Now, step into the shoes of another country watching this happen. You might think, wait a second, we believed reserves were untouchable. We thought they were safe, but if politics can affect access, are they really ours? That question echoed far beyond Russia, because once doubt enters a system, people start preparing for possibilities, not certainty, possibilities. China kept reducing parts of its US Treasury holdings over time, while increasing attention toward gold and broader diversification strategy. Other countries explored trading directly with one another. Local currencies entered conversations. Gold buying increased among central banks globally. Suddenly, people began using a word more often: de-dollarization. Now, before someone jumps into the comments saying, the dollar is dead, not so fast, because here's reality. Replacing the dollar isn't like replacing your phone. You can't wake up Monday morning and say, cool, new system. Global finance doesn't move like TikTok trends. It moves like giant ships in the ocean, slowly, very slowly. The dollar still dominates global trade. Major financial markets still trust US Treasury assets. Investors still run toward dollars during uncertainty. Even during crises, people often buy more dollar, which sounds almost ridiculous. Imagine creating panic, and people respond by giving you even more money. That's the level of influence the system built. But influence isn't permanent. History doesn't work that way. Empires rise, empires peak, empires evolve. Then, new competitors appear. Sometimes they arrive with armies, sometimes with technology, sometimes with economics, and sometimes with quiet little moves nobody notices at first, because major shifts rarely announce themselves. Nobody wakes up saying, "Today begins a new world," or people usually realize it years later, after enough dots connect, after enough small decisions stack together, after enough cracks spread across the wall. So here's the trillion-dollar question. Is the petrodollar ending? Maybe, maybe not. The real answer is more complex, because what we're seeing may not be one giant replacement. It may be dozens of smaller alternatives growing at once. Gold, regional currencies, digital payment systems, central bank digital currencies, bilateral trade agreements, new financial networks. One challenger alone might not matter, but many together, that's different. Because history teaches one brutal lesson. Power rarely disappears overnight. It fades gradually. Then suddenly, everyone notices. And if the last 50 years were the story of how one financial machine conquered the world, the next 50 years might become the story of what happens when the world starts building new ones. The question isn't whether the game is changing. The question is, who's writing the next rules?